Well, hello everybody, this is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine, and welcome to your Critique of the Week. It's Friday, March 20th. Thanks for joining me. So glad to be back on our regular time after some weeks shifting to a different schedule. Had some Saturday shows, but we're back to the normal Fridays. Let's see who we have here. Dr. Q is here. Great to see you, Dr. Q. Been a bit. Steve Horrell is here. Michael Ketchum, Donut Burmia, Dee Coleman is here. I already said? No, I didn't say that. Winston Munn is here. Patty Arbor. Leslie Ann Skechterson, Lonely Dreamer, 639. Good to see you. Steve Horrell is here. Clayton Clark. Hey, Clayton. Kimberly Gibson Tran. Sharon Ferrante. Great to see you, Sharon. It's been a while. Jamie Thomas is here. Christina Nueven. PMB again. Jamal Uden is here. Virginia Adore. Serena is here. First time. She got some poems in the queue. Serena. Cod 8877. Okay. Well, as always, this is the Critique of the Week. What we're going to do is talk about poems, see what works, what doesn't. Talk about everything from as minute as like diction and line breaks to the bigger picture, which is usually the biggest thing, is how we understand what's going on and what actually happened. It's really important to get that across. That's always helpful. So we've got Mecca Miles already saying they've got poems in the queue, and Serena too. So if anybody else does, we've got one more, probably room for one more person. But what we're going to do is, like we've been doing, is look up folks who are here and focus on those poems first. Since you're here, might as well. Also, if you're a regular, feel free to submit more often. I have to check out what the guidelines say as far as how often you can submit. But I don't really want to. I think I restricted it too much. I think I said like something like once a year. We want to. If you're a regular here, you should be able to do it more often than that. Okay, let's see. So go here. So you can pull up Serena, and I don't really. Not sure what the last name is. So let's see. Serena. I'm going to assume it's Serena Strohmeyer Gotch. Is that right? Well, we'll hopefully. Yeah. Got a couple of poems in the queue just from March 15th. We'll check to confirm, because that's the only Serena, so it probably is. And then the other poem was, yes, it's me. Okay. And the other poem was Mecca, so we'll do those two at least. Here we go, but let's take a look at these two poems from Serena. Are there any general questions? Let's see. No general questions. There is that slot. So if you'd like to have your poems critiqued, I should say too, all you got to do is go to rattle.com. You'll see the thing up in the content for Critique of the Week. There's a submission portal there. Submit your poems through that portal to Critique of the Week. It's not for publication. It's only for sharing and talking about on this show with a wonderful group of people at the round table. You can submit your poems after that for publication. But what we're really doing is taking a look at poems. You could also... and one of the reasons I started this 8 years ago or so was to, everybody's always like, oh, can I have some feedback on my poems? And when you get 500 poems or whatever submitted a day, there's no way we can provide feedback. There's just too many people. There's 3 of us working here and, so many out there. So what we can do, though, is share feedback publicly so that everybody can learn from it, and then that's just a much more effective use of our time, I guess you'd say, too. Anyway, let's take a look at these poems. Serena Strohmeyer Gotch. The first one is The Solstice Maiden. Okay, let's take a look at this. The Solstice Maiden. And the first thing you'll notice is the poem is centered, which is not a convention that's usually, it's not a convention. It's usually we'll have them left aligned. So there's a few poems we've published about 6,000 poems in Rattle over 25 years. I think about 5 or 6 of them have been centered on the page. It's not very often that we do. Sometimes there's a good reason, or sometimes it's just a great poem. But it's pretty rare. And there's a reason. I think it's easier to read when poems are left aligned than any other thing. Because then because you have this thing, it's actually the fastest muscle in your whole body. It's the muscle that makes that ballistic eye movement that just jumps your vision from one spot to another spot. And if you know where you're going, you sort of have a target. It's much easier, and it becomes a much, you don't have to take a second to find where the next line is, which makes the reading experience easier. And that's why I think, that's just a theory. No one's ever really explained why poems tend to be right aligned. Back in the days of typesetting on a Gutenberg press, there were reasons. There's certain length, and that's how you'd start. So maybe that's it. I don't know. But anyway, let's read the poem. The Solstice Maiden. Wander out into the forest at night, on the shortest day of the year, when the air has a bone-deep chill, frosty wind, always grasping for the warmth of bare skin. The trees barely dare to whisper amongst themselves, for even they are afraid. If you are lucky, you might catch a glimpse of the Solstice Maiden drinking from a creek, the water turned silver by the moon. Her long, snowy hair will sparkle as it billows loose in the wind, revealing her face, cheeks and nose rosy from the cold, mouth etched with murmured hymns and legends. If you are unlucky, her gaze will turn to you, creek water dripping from her soft hands. Her eyes will make you lean closer, for they are so black no light will ever sparkle within their depths, and one cannot help but wonder what lies inside. She'll incline her head and lazily blink once, an invitation. Slowly but surely you will inch closer, body moving against your will like a marionette, and she will hold out her arms like you are good friends who haven't seen each other in a very, very long time. Her silky white dress will swirl with legs around her legs, and her smile will be sweet, yet sly, as she pulls you closer, reeling you in like a fish caught on a hook. Suddenly her gentle hands will harden, gripping you as tight as your blood will cease to flow, and she will inhale deeply, breathing in your secrets, your sins, your memories, your story. Yeah. So interesting. So there is a nice, there's a nice pacing. It's easy to read as far as the voice goes. It falls under some, again, there's this you being drawn in. We don't know who the you is, and that makes it a little more difficult to connect with the poem. So that's one of the things. If you are lucky, you might catch a glimpse of the Solstice Maiden, but we don't know. So there is a kind of you can have a dramatic monologue. It's kind of how this feels a little bit. But it really helps. Yeah. As Jamie Thomas says, this is nicely written, but I don't feel drawn to it because there's not much personal connection. So it really helps. And this is just advice that I give constantly, but I think it's maybe the best small piece of advice you could get, is to really imagine somebody telling the poem to somebody else. And who would be telling? So we have the you, which is the reader being told this, but we don't have a sense of who is doing the telling or who the reader is. It's very amorphous, and it would help if we had a sense, even in your mind, for a story like this, where we're telling a fairy tale like story. Imagine an actual person, around a fire or something, or after dinner telling a story. Imagine the realness of that and how the story would be told, and that'll help make it feel like a more connected story. Because right now we have a bit of a limbo space, first of all. So that's one piece of advice that just is always very helpful. Yeah. Burmese says some nice details and imagery. Kimberly Gibson Tran says, I like the opening stanza the best, but the subsequent stanzas seem to work at revealing rather than preserving some mystical mystery. Yeah. And Jamie Thomas says, I'd love to see the poet inside the story. Yeah. So we do get, a story, and we get a scene played out. We get to feel that sense of what's going on. Let me read it one more time, and we'll pay more attention to close detail. And I would, to finish I didn't really finish the line centering thing. So much of, what your perception, there's this great book called Persuasion by, I can't remember what his name is, but so much of your perception of experience is based on your initial assumptions, you never get a second chance to make the first impression, is an expression like that. And one of the things that helps you make a first impression is, looking professional, looking like you've read sort of the canon, you're a reader, you know what you're doing. And having a poem centered is a bad first impression because that's just not the standard that people do. There's a few reasons that it's not, it is not the standard. Some of them useful, some of them just the history of how poems are written down. But it did. I think the poem, first of all, I would just left align it. Okay, so that's the first thing. And now let's go through, and there's an interesting, the scene builds, and then we have to think about like what happens, but we'll look at the closer details. So the Solstice Maiden is a nice title. I've never heard of that. I don't know if this is a myth that that other people are familiar with, or it's something completely made up. But it is, it has the right mood, and it also points to a bit of the mystery, which is a nice title. Let me slide this over here so I can see it a little better. Okay. Hang on. Okay, well, here we go. Wander out into the forest at night, on the shortest day of the year, when the air has a bone-deep chill, frosty wind always grasping for the warmth of bare skin. There's one thing that too, even as the details, there are a lot of details, but there aren't a lot of specific details. The wind is frosty. You're grasping for warmth. The skin is bare. It's a very generic kind of detail that it's one of the reasons why we feel like we're connected to the poem, but we're not really gripped by the poem. And if you read, just look at a great for storytelling like this. Look at Edgar Allan Poe. And then the way details emerge in something even here. The Raven. Let's just look at the Raven. We'll pull it up. Put the Raven over here. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as if someone gently rapping by my chamber door. So I get the chamber door, A chamber is a very specific word. And I think the kind of poem that we had here would just use door, and that's the kind of like some little extra details to make it feel particular and not a generic space. And it only takes a few, and so it's just things like that. Let's read another stanza. Distinctly I remember it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow, vainly I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow for the lost Lenore. And we get Lenore as a specific name, so we get that too. For the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels named Lenore, nameless here forevermore. So already we have the sense of the scene, but we have a little bit of specific detail. And that's missing from this poem. It feels a little bit generic. Okay. Where was I? If you were lucky, you might catch a glimpse. And here's the introduction of the you, too. So this is the first time, and the first time the you appears, that we know that it's a direct address to us. If you were lucky, you might catch a glimpse of the Solstice Maiden drinking from a creek. So see here, like what kind of creek? A specific creek? A little bit. It just takes a tiny bit. It's like some kind of like seasoning. You just had this little bit of amount of specificity, makes the whole thing come to life more. So as it billows loose in the wind, her long snowy hair will sparkle as it billows loose in the wind. Snowy hair is an interesting descriptor, but it's hard to imagine that. So a phrase like that, it would be nice to see it a little bit more, what that would mean. PMB says Tallahassee Forest sounds nice. Yeah. Yeah. And Winston Munn says the details should matter. That's a good point too. Yeah. And Kimberly Gibson Tran puts it this way. I'd like to see more imagistic tightening. Like stanza 2, instead of the water turned silver by the moon, we could say the water silvered by moon, or moon silvered. Yeah. Notice the difference. The water silvered by moon sounds so much better than the water turned silver by the moon. First of all, it's like sort of clunky, there are a lot more syllables in the way it is, and much more succinct and tight and dense in its exposition than in Kimberly's version. That's a good suggestion too. The water turns silver by the moon. Her long, snowy hair will sparkle as it billows loose in the wind, revealing her face, cheeks and nose rosy. So it's the kind of thing. And when we get details, they're always sort of generic details too. Cheeks and nose rosy from the cold. Like what other word can you use than rosy? That's the kind of thing. Cliches. the problem is they're things we've heard before, so they don't stimulate us. And really stimulating our imagination is what you're doing with a poem. You're trying to create the scene and then make us feel something from the scene. And so having phrases that we've already heard, they're already chunked in our brain. They don't excite new neurons. They don't make new connections. And so they don't connect with us as strongly. And so find ways, instead of saying, hair is billowing loose, that's just something that always happens. Cheeks are rosy, I mean, we've had those words connected to that idea so many times that it just doesn't mean as much. So find new ways to say it. And that's one of the reasons why Kimberly's suggestion of silvered is a verb, the water silvered by the moon, is so much better than turned silver by the moon, because just the strangeness of that phrasing makes the poem stand out a little more. Yeah. And Kimberly points out this too. Cheeks and nose rosy feels like a pretty description, but I thought we were supposed to be afraid here. Yeah, that's true. That's a good point as well. The way things are described should match the emotion you're evoking too. Okay. Revealing her face, cheeks and nose rosy from the cold, mouth etched with murmured hymns and legends. If you are lucky, her gaze will turn to you, creek water dripping from the soft hand. So we already had creek water up above. How can we describe the creek water in a particular way? You want a few drops of particularity to make the story come to life. Dripping from her soft hands, her eyes will make you lean closer, for they are so black no light will ever sparkle within their depths. And again, sparkle, light sparkling. We just want to find new ways to say these things to bring that to life. And one cannot help but wonder what lies inside. She'll incline her head and lazily blink once, an invitation. One of the things that it's nice, the reason why the poem reads pretty well, there's no punctuation. There's a nice use of, some people don't want to have to use punctuation in poems. And it's actually a good example of how you can get away with that by making sure the line breaks are consistent with the syntax of the poem or whatever. So it's a natural places to pause. You fill in the gap of what punctuation should be there much more easily. And this is a good example of how to make line breaks if you're not going to have punctuation. They feel like a scroll of additions rolling out as the poem goes. Anyway, an invitation. Slowly but surely you will inch closer, body moving against your will like a marionette. And again, I think the main thing is just this idea of what is sort of like a pat description, and being like a marionette when someone else controls you is just another cliche, and that just doesn't bring stuff to life, and she will hold out her arms like you are good friends who haven't seen each other in a very, very long time. Her silky white dress will swirl around her legs, and she will smile, or her smile will be sweet yet sly as she pulls you closer, reeling you in like a fish caught on a hook. And again, I mean, that's cliche too. Suddenly, her gentle hands will harden, gripping you so tight, your blood will cease to flow, and she will inhale deeply, breathing in your secrets, your sins, your memories, your story. And so the last piece of advice, and this is all pretty much general poetry advice I'm sharing here. This is like the bedrock of how to make a poem compelling. First of all, give a little bit for the reader to experience themselves too. So here, suddenly, and I think isn't it the Stephen King book on writing who says to never use the word suddenly? Just because suddenly, just do it suddenly, and then we'll get the experience of it happening suddenly, So there's that problem too. But then let the reader experience some kind of emotional reaction. Like, don't explain everything that's going to be happening. And if you ended the poem here, her smile will be sweet yet sly as she pulls you closer, reeling you in. I think if we just said yet sly as she pulls you closer and cut after that, cut this and down, we know something sinister is happening. There's the sense of something sinister. And if you let that hang, if she says, and her smile will be sweet yet sly as she pulls you closer, and then you end the poem there, then we get to fill in the next line. And by filling in the next line, we participate in the story, and then we experience the story on a lot more profound and more physical level. And so if you cut the poem here, let the end be implied, and then we can fill in the gap. So that's something too. Okay. Um, yeah, BMP says mentally, or BMP, who is really PMB, which makes it confusing. Thanks so much. Says mentally scanning my poems for suddenly. And the funny thing is, if I'm remembering right, I think, right away after Stephen King wrote that, so people went through and pointed out the 5,884 times he used the word suddenly in his books. So, do as I say, not as I do, I guess. Yeah, Winston Munn says, Hugo suggested never to use the word very either. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's sort of degrees of words having strength, and really weight. It's like an atomic weight. If you look at the periodic table, there's sort of a periodic table of words you could make where different, there's like there's the metals and the non-metals and the noble gases and stuff. And they're like it'd be fun to make an actual periodic table like that. But it is like certain things have certain weights, and nouns have so much weight. They're the most weighty. And then verbs are the next weighty. And then adjectives behind that. And then there's and adverbs or whatever. What is a vary? I say I'm terrible with parts of speech anyway. But whatever vary is, where it's just modifying an adjective, I mean, that is like as weak as you can go. It doesn't add much at all. So, yeah. And then you just have these words they're there taking up space, but not adding anything to the scale of the meaning of the poem, Okay, so anyway, so that's our suggestions there. Let's take a look at the second poem. And it is, I should say, the scene draws us in. We get to experience it. And Dryman too said verbs are more poetic than nouns. I'm not sure if that's the case. I do always, every time I say this, I think about whether or not nouns or verbs are stronger. And I actually think that nouns are. Because nouns add that sense of physicality to a space. You can do a whole, it's kind of like in dialogue, you can have wonderful dialogue where it's just like he said, she said, he said, she said. You don't need any special verb to do that, And I think there's a way too that the verbs in a way can sort of fade to the background in a way that nouns can't. I think verbs can be really great, but they can also function really well being in the background. Whereas nouns, nouns are sort of ever present, I think. So they have more mass in this. I don't know. That's what I think, but maybe we could talk about that more in the future. Anyway, let's take a look at the second poem. And again, we are looking at poems by Serena Strohmeyer Gotch from California. Yeah. And Zenangle says, I agree that nouns make things more concrete, but verbs are quite necessary and are so important. Oh, they definitely are. They're number 2, I would say. But I could see arguing over a beer, whether they're 1 or 2. It's closer than the other. There's a big gap. There's a big drop-off with adjectives, that's for sure. And then, prepositions and things being toward the bottom. Okay, let's take a look at the second poem. And, Smittable does this sometimes. Hang on, bear with me. Their previewer didn't load. But if I refresh, I think it will load. Call of the Sea. Okay. Yeah, Ryan McCarty says Haney is the king of verbs. Yeah, Haney is great. Wrong thing. Where are we? There we are. Okay, this is Call of the Sea. Who's that book? It's not even... I'm drawing a blank on the poet I'm thinking of. There's a poet similar to Haney that's even more... It was so impressive with his verb usage. What is his name? It's one of those tip of the tongue things. Anyway, Call of the Sea is the next poem. We won't mention the centered. We talked about it before. Somebody said Serena. Kimberly Gibson Tran says Serena is good with titles. I agree. It's a good title again. Call of the Sea. It makes me. It's interesting enough, specific enough, and makes me curious enough that I want to read the poem. So it's a good title. Have you ever heard the soft hush hush of waves creeping up the shoreline? A wayward note among the shrieking laughter of the wind, weaving through the dancing trees and blades of grass under cover of the storm. whispering across roads and sidewalks, murmuring over to your house and snaking along the side up to your room, humming onto your windowsill and slipping inside until it is curled up on your pillow, an out-of-place melody reaching into your dreams. Have you ever awoken to find a breath of sea salt on your tongue, your body rocking to the rhythm of unseen waves, head still swaying to the tune of a forgotten song? With the soft caress of a breeze cupping your cheek, rolling down your neck and along your arm, tingling as it reaches your fingertips and gives a gentle tug before letting go, and your breaths quicken, lips quivering and longing. Have you ever followed the hidden heartbeat of the storm with the rhythmic flow of blood through your body, pushing your feet towards step by trembling step, and the steady ebb and flow of your breaths, bringing the elation of the tempest into your body, until the comfort of your once warmed bed is forgotten, and the rampaging winds greet you at your doorstep? Have you ever danced with the fever of the partying tempest filling your body, letting your feet tap on the earth to the rhythm of the rain, throwing your head back and twirling with the gusts that tangle your hair, rolling your hips to every pulsing boom of thunder, and leaping up through the air to meet every searing bolt of lightning? Screaming right along with the storm, all the while as you traverse the streets hidden by the low-hanging clouds. Have you ever felt the damp kernels of obsidian sand pressing against your bare feet as asphalt waves gives way to midnight-soaked beach? Cling to each foot with cool, soothing fingers, pulling the heat of the storm from your body step by careful step. Welcoming you with whispers of long-forgotten secrets tucked into the depths of a mass painted by a moonless night, guiding you onward to the call of the tide. Have you ever stood before the ocean as it leaps and sings to a melody all of its own, with creatures of seawater and sand twirling up into the heart of the storm? The rush of their oars blowing back your hair and misting your face, before they spiral down with a thundering rain, and surge against your legs with a rage of sea foam gurgles frantically grasping at your feet as they slowly recede, begging you to go with them. Have you ever given in and let salty tears mingle with the water until you become one and the same, allowing the waves to wrap you in their embrace, the current tucking you against its chest, pressing a finger to your lips as it whisks you under and takes you to the home that awaits deep within? Yeah. Okay, so Kimberly Gibson Tran says, I'm personally not a fan of Have You Ever construction here because the answer for me is too easy. No, this is not my experience. Why don't you just tell me your experience without asking? Jeanette Berman says, where is this going? So there are, Joanne Pendleton says, lovely descriptions. I agree. I think the poem, there's a really nice rhythm and a nice sense of the storytelling in the poem that it makes reading easy, and the details are nice enough to hold our interests. Leslie Ann Skecterson says, nice images but not going anywhere. I think the problem is it sort of goes the same place for too long. And we sort of, it ends up repeating itself over and over again, to the point where we get a little bit tired, even though the details are interesting and we're sort of being drawn in. By the end, it does find a bit of a story emerges that it ends up being, someone being depressed and sort of suicidally merging with the water. And that it's a soft turn. It's a slight turn, but it's a real turn at the end. But I think the main problem is the poem just goes on too long. Like, it can't sustain itself. And what I would do, we have the same problem with the last poem, with that there are a lot of cliche is not quite the right word. It's just sort of pat, it's just what you would expect kind of descriptions that make the poem. It just doesn't feel as vivid as it could, having that, as Pound said, make it new. It needs the descriptions to be new. And that's what was going on with the last poem too, that sort of kept it from really coming to life, is that sense of newness in the way that things are described. But let's see. But the main thing here, I think it just goes on too long. So what I would do is make it like 4 of the Have You Ever Heard, or Have You Ever, of the Have You Evers, and then find the best details and pack them into 4. And I think that's about how long it can sustain us before it has to make that turn as it gets sort of deeper into the darkness of what we're talking about. Yeah, as Zenagel says, I would keep the most unexpected descriptions. That's what we want, Jamie Thomas says the poet writes really well, but the content feels so distant to me. Yeah. Winston Munn says I suggest reading Dean Koontz prose to see how to make things immediate. Yeah. But so the main thing that I think is filling out, taking out the expected descriptions and leave the most unexpected ones, and try to find things that are expected, turn them on their heads, make it a little more surprising as you describe things. But there is a really great voice, great rhythm, a good sense of storytelling, good titling. There are a lot of good things to like in this poem. So thanks for sharing that. I think we talked about the other one in more depth. I think we're going to move on to the next poet. But thanks for sharing these. And I was thinking though, this does remind me. How long is that? What the Mary Oliver one? Have you ever? That's a pretty short poem, right? Mary Oliver's. Yeah, I lost. I can't remember the title of this one. It's not Have You Ever. She has one that repeats in it. I think it's about 4, and that has a bigger turn at the end. Oh, what is that one called though? Is there like a? Sorry, we'll sit here for a minute. If I can find it, we'll move on. But the point is, if you can keep this concise and tight and have a stronger turn, it'll feel satisfactory. Is it a morning poem? No. Oh well. Okay. Well, anyway, let's move on. But thanks for sharing that. That was Serena. Serena Strohmeyer Gotch. Okay, let's take a look at another poet. And the next poet was, I didn't write it down like I did last time. It was, but way at the top. We'll find it quick. Hi, everyone. Hello. That's me. Where? Sorry, where? The river, the hello. Starts with an M, right? Who is that? Hang on. Surprise. Okay. Oh, BMP says got a couple in there. Mecca Miles. There it is. Oh, that's right. Because it was the handle is different than the name. Okay. Mecca Miles. That was it. Let's take a look. Taste the Rainbow. Okay. Taste the Rainbow. Is it 2 poems or? Yeah, we got 2 poems. Any general questions? No. So let's take a look. This submission coming from mid-February from Mecca. Mecca from San Antonio, Texas, down the street from us. Here we go. Taste the Rainbow. Let's take a look. And one of the things, I think, isn't Taste the Rainbow like a Skittles ad campaign? Like a tagline? So my first thought, and I'm pretty sure it is I hope it's about Skittles, because if not, it makes that too stark in the mind. Yeah. Skittles. Oh, it's Skittles. Okay, yeah. Okay. Did I say something different? Did I say M&Ms? Whatever. Yeah, Skittles. That makes a lot more sense than M&Ms. Anyway, here we go with this poem. Taste the Rainbow. It is June 2nd. A bag of colorless Skittles rests on the counter. There we go. That's good. In the space between the sunscreen and the clearance bin. The rainbow is given up in solidarity. A company relinquishes its signature look to say there are more important things than a trademark, only to reclaim it come July. And somewhere in America, a queer person dies by suicide, a bag of Skittles on their nightstand. The receipt from a company profiting from a pride they didn't believe in is not far away. Their bright Target crewneck t-shirt, that reads "Love wins" is a cruel irony as the color drains from their supple cheeks. It is July 1st, and nothing has changed but the color of a candy bag. Trans women still flinch when they see a bathroom sign in Texas. A gay couple quickly lets go of each other's hand as they enter a small-town convenience store, and that colorless Skittles wrapper decomposes in a shallow grave. Well, that's an interesting poem here. So it is. So Taste the Rainbow is, as I said, you have to have it be about Skittles if you're going to use a quote like that as the title. And it was. So it is June 2nd, and June being Pride Month. It's the second day of that. Let's see. Okay. Yeah, and so, oops. Yeah, my, let's see. This will do it like that. I did an update to the software I use, just one of those updates, and some of the functions, the defaults are a little bit different. Anyway, so Kimberly Gibson Trent says I like the conceit, and Jamie Thomas says, oh, interesting already, but calling out the irony isn't necessary. The images can stand alone, and that's my main piece of advice for this one is to let it be. Again, it was similar to that first poem where the solstice maiden, was that the word, was sort of drawing us near, and we knew there was something menacing, and then it said it was going to turn our breath, suck our breath and steal our dreams or whatever. It's much more powerful if we end the poem there, and our imagination is what fills in that gap. And it's the same type thing, and that's why show don't tell is the big piece of writing advice. It's like number one rule in a writing class, is because having that. Having things told to us it's such a weaker way to convey something. It just doesn't work as well as presenting us something and then letting us make the connections and have the experience ourselves. And so that's the issue here is that Kimberly's talking about, or no, I guess that was Jamie Thomas talking about. Anyway, let's look at the poem a little more in detail. Taste the Rainbow. It is June 2nd. A bag of colorless Skittles should be capitalized, I think, rests on the counter in the space between the sunscreen and the clearance bin. The rainbow is given up in solidarity. A company relinquishes its signature look to say there are more important things than a trademark, only to reclaim it come July. So the rainbow is given up in solidarity. So Skittles is no longer a rainbow. Can you bring this to life? Because I don't know what the bag looks like, what colors the Skittles are. I didn't see this happen. Even if I did, I would want it in the poem. I don't know what this bag would actually look like without the colorfulness that you're used to of the Skittles. So this is a place where it'd be really great to describe what that is. Kimberly Gibson Trent says, I would cut in solidarity from the rainbow is given up. Yeah, exactly. That's what we were talking about. The show don't tell thing. If we have, the rainbow was given up or is given up, and we don't have the solidarity, let us sort of make the connections, and then we'll feel the weight of it more strongly. A company relinquishes its signature look to say there are more important things than a trademark, only to reclaim it in July. Holly York says, taste the rainbow might work better as a line later in the poem. And Clayton Clarkson starts to feel didactic. Yeah, and you could notice the sense, there's a different register, different mode of speaking. That's why I already gave this advice earlier, but imagining one person telling the poem to another person, and it can be anyone telling it to anyone. It can be like you telling it to your toaster. It can be your mom telling it to your aunt's ghost. Whatever it is, if you imagine a person actually telling the whole poem, then you'll have a consistency in the voice, and then that is missing in this poem. Another thing that you can do sometimes is like tell the whole poem in an accent, like use a southern accent or something, even though you don't speak in a southern accent, and that helps it stay locked in the voice. Because right now the diction and the register shifts to this descriptive mode, which pulls us out of the storytelling in this spot. And it starts to feel didactic because the poem is a little bit didactic, but also the way that the words are used ends up being that way too. and that takes away some of the strength of the poem. So, a bag of colorless Skittles rests on the counter in the space between the sunscreen and the clearance bin. That's a straightforward description that's sort of telling it like it is. There's an authenticity to that voice. But now here, a company relinquishes its signature, look to say there are more important things than a trademark, only to reclaim it come July. That's not the same. The person who said this sort of straightforward, authentic, this is how regular people speak description, would not sort of go through the loops of this. This is sort of more like a expository essay type voice. Relinquishes, like would somebody use the word relinquishes? And so it's a lack of consistency in the voice, and that makes it feel like we don't get lost in the storytelling either. Winston Munn says if you delete that second stanza, it's better. Now, let's see. So the space between the sunscreen and the clearance bin. And somewhere in America, a queer person dies by suicide. Yeah, you just skip it. The queer person dies by suicide, a bag of Skittles on their nightstand, the receipt from a company profiting from a pride they didn't believe in is not far away. So again, and somewhere in America, a queer person dies by suicide. That is an authentic voice that somebody would say. And switching to the receipt from a company profiting from a pride they didn't believe in is not far away. That's not a phrase anybody would say. It totally loses its voice. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and Deb T was pointing it out too. And so having that consistent voice, because you want us, what a poem is the music of speech. You want us to get lost in the storytelling of your voice so that we get to have this experience where the speaker and me merge, the reader merge, and I get to experience the empathy of being you for a little bit. And that's the power of it. But to have that, you have to have a consistent voice. And that's why it's so important to imagine, to know who's speaking to whom. Yeah. All right, let's keep going a little bit. The bright Target crewneck t-shirt that reads "Love wins" is a cruel irony as the color drains from their supple cheeks. So the person died by suicide. The Skittles are on the nightstand. They're still wearing the bright Target crewneck t-shirt saying "Love wins" as they die. It is July 1st, and nothing has changed but the color of a candy bag. And again, we go back to the voice that works and feels natural. And nothing has changed but the color of a candy bag. That's a great line. Trans women still flinch when they see a bathroom sign in Texas. And this is more like essay mode again. So we just keep flopping back and forth between good storytelling and an essay. In an expository essay, we're trying to convince us of something, a political opinion. And if you stay locked in this mode, tell the scene where the person dies with the Skittles on their nightstand, then we'll feel it a lot more. A gay couple quickly lets go of each other's hand as they enter a small town convenience store. That colorless Skittle wrapper decomposes in a shallow grave. And then that's a nice ending too, and a good way to end the poem. Yeah. Okay, so I think you get the idea. We want to, show this happening, and how would the best way to be? You could imagine the bag of color Skittles resting on the nightstand, and you just leap right into that. Yeah. Yeah, trimmed away. This is Jamie Thomas. Trimmed away. This is a great poem of images that say everything I think the poet intends. Exactly. Yeah. Like how can you tell this poem only showing? You want to have part of it is feeling that it's not didactic. Part of it, having a strong opinion about something that you want to share. Yeah, it's a good thing to make a poem for, but you have to have it be where you don't tell us how to feel, I guess, at the end of the day. And so if you lay out these images, you start out with it's June 2nd and the colorless Skittles are there. You can describe a little bit of why they chose color, without the sort of sarcasm and irony. Let us say, they chose this, and then this happens, and we get the image. Then the poem would work. As Winston Munn says, this could be strong with nothing but the images. Yeah. And Ayanna Anderson says, I like the ending, nice strong images there. Yeah, I agree. Okay, let's take a look at the other poem. Oh, and again, it's doing this. Hang on, let me see if we just let it load again. Okay, there we go. 30 going on 13. The golden, and I should say again, this was poems by Mecca Miles. 30 going on 13. The golden orange sun rises over dusty 1555 English soil. The stage is set, the curtains part, the congregation watches silently in reverence as a 9-year-old steps onto the stage. 5 o'clock's shadow, smile lines again as deep as craters, and whatever it was their equivalent of icy hot wafting through the rafters. The man-child proceeds to tell a tale of loss, of pain, of a reuniting he never thought would come to be. 90 minutes pass, and suddenly his parents enter stage left, a couple barely older than he is. A father, sharing the same aches and pains as his son, crouches down to embrace him. The curtains close, and the crowd sheds a silent tear. Nearly half a millennium later, another 9-year-old appears on a television screen, prepubescent and naive, lacking the dignity and grace of his ancestor, no less believable, not due to skill, but due to reality. And somehow, this feels like cheating. Where is the pageantry of a childhood earned through chronic back pain? Where is the honor of watching a grown man with suitcases under his eyes pretend to discovery while arthritic hands grip the stage with all the confidence of someone who has already lost everything twice over? Bring back the children played by people who have survived wars. Bring back innocence performed by someone who knows exactly how temporary it is. Bring back staged playgrounds while recess is followed by hot compresses and ice packs. Let the kids be kids, off-screen, unbothered, growing without notes from a director. Let the adults don the bowl-cut strap on the suspended shorts and take a brave, creaking step onto the stage once more. This is not nostalgia nor deception. This is tradition. No one portrays childhood with more honesty than someone who has already lived it, who commits fully despite knowing they will need to lie down immediately after curtain call. Let's see. So for this poem, again, we get into this very didactic mode. And having seen the two poems, it's why we asked for two poems, because you sort of have to see both poems to give the best advice. And the best advice here, I think, is to write. And as Kimberly Gibson Trent says, it feels a bit preachy in the second half. It's another interesting idea, says PMB, and it is. But if you know, no surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader. If you know what you're going in ahead of time, again, I'm feel. Clayton Clark says, again, I feel like I'm being told how to feel, and this is why I say the opposite of poetry is propaganda. They're two things on opposite poles. One works toward discovery, and one works toward propagation. And having other people, telling other people what they should feel or do or whatever. That's not that's not art. That's artifice in the service of spreading a thought. And there's nothing wrong with that. But that's not where art comes from. There's a deeper understanding that has to emerge for us to be interested in this kind of exploration that we do through art. And if you know at the very beginning the message that you're sending, there's no learning involved in that process. Yeah. PMB says, here's what I see that you don't. Yeah. So what we want to do is find something. It's sort of the wrong material to be writing about. Yeats called it rhetoric. Yeah. And the difference between poetry and rhetoric, you could put it that way. But the things you want to write about are the things that you don't quite understand, the things that you're trying to make sense of, not the things that you already know. Because the truth is, all the things that we think we know are boring as hell, you know? What's interesting and what is compelling and worth the space and time of making poems and sharing poems is the stuff that's too complicated to know that simply. And so what you want to do is when we're writing something, even if it's a topic like this, like it can be something that you want to address, but write toward like the thing that bugs you, the thing that you can't quite express, the thing that you don't quite understand, the thing that just doesn't quite make sense, and try to make it make sense for yourself. And that's the thing that we're going to be drawn to and want to read. And so here, it feels sort of, there's this whole run toward the end of the poem, and this really that mode really kicks in. Where is the pageantry of a childhood earned through chronic back pain? Where is the it feels like, bring back the children, bring back the innocence, bring back the staged playgrounds. It feels like somebody giving a speech for the president of the school president or whatever, like a campaign stump speech. And there's and that's why that's rhetoric, but that's not poetry. It's poetry devices in the service of rhetoric. So let's see. Yeah, Winston Munn says, Yeats again, from arguments with self we make poetry. Yep, there. And that's it. So if you want to write about this topic, let the kids be kids. I agree completely with it. I love this sentiment. We try to make our kids more free all the time. Let the kids be kids, off screen, unbothered, growing without notes from a director. So what is it about this position that doesn't quite make sense? You don't quite understand, that bothers you, that makes you want to cling to it so much. Those are the things that, And then Kimberly Gibson Tran says, too, the thesis of this poem is a little confusing, too. Are we saying young kids shouldn't play adults because this is not their lived experience? Yeah, I'm not quite sure. Even if it's preaching, I'm not sure what exactly it's preaching. This is not nostalgia nor deception. This is tradition. No one portrays childhood with more honesty. How does it end? And with more honesty than someone who has already lived it, who commits fully despite knowing they will need to lie down immediately after the curtain call. So where the poem is working is the gold orange sun rises over dusty 1555 English soil. The stage is set, the curtains part, the congregation watches silently in reverence. So that you're building a scene, and we're wondering what's going to happen here. As a 9-year-old steps onto the stage, 5 o'clock shadow, smile lines as deep as craters, and whatever it was, their equivalent of icy hot wafting through the rafters. Yeah, it's a nice, and then icy hot's a nice specific detail too. Somebody mentioned before a little, Anyway. So, Lonely Dreamer, this is the poet Mecca Miles, says, oddly enough, this was supposed to be a kind of funny poem about having children play adults again. Yeah, so that's what I say. That's where it was working. The golden orange sun rises, so we have the stage set, the rafters. The man sees a tale of loss, of pain, of reuniting, never come to be. 90 minutes pass, and suddenly his parents enter stage left, a couple barely older than he is. So the whole thing here is really working because you're describing what's going on. A father sharing the same aches and pains as his son crouches down to embrace him. The curtains close, and the crowd sheds a silent tear. And it's this shift here. Nearly half a millennium later, another 9-year-old appears on a television screen, prepubescent and naive, lacking the dignity and grace of his ancestor, no less believable, not due to skill, but due to reality. So it's very expository. We built this scene. I'm trying to think of a poem that is a good... Winston says, I like the details at the start of this poem. But it's here where it just goes off the rails. It ends up being like a didactic essay, as we were saying. where can you go with this? I'm trying to think of a poem that sort of sets up this way, that has a good transition. Yes, Kimberly Gibson Tran says, where I got lost is the jump to the future. I don't understand the issue there. Yeah. And I wonder, I'm trying to, I think there's a Tony Hoagland poem, I think, that I'm thinking of. I'm not going to be able to find this one either. I've had one of those days where the retrieval is not as good as the presumptions. But if instead of like moving and sort of setting up a parallel, nearly half a millennium later, and again, I think it comes down to having that consistent voice, actually, the more I think about it. So imagine, okay, here's a poem I can pull up to share. The Richard Garcia, his Andy Rooney poem, a poem by Andy Rooney from Richard Garcia. How about these paper clips? And if you don't know who Andy Rooney was, he would come on 60 Minutes and give some kind of rant at the end of every show, like a cranky old man shaking his fist at the sky. And it was sort of supposed to be serious, but it was also really comical at the, I don't know. Anyway, but just let me read a few lines of this. How about these paper clips? Consider the humble paper clip. Paper clips do not remain in their containers. Paper clips can be found at the bottom of the sea. The first paper clip was made of mastodon ivory. Some paper clips were covered in plastic. Some paper clips are plastic. Metal paper clips are desirable. You can twist them while on the phone. You can use one to pick your teeth. And see, it just goes on like that. Like Andy Rooney or any sort of angry man, the grandpa on The Simpsons or whatever, shaking his fist at the sky. It's that voice consistently through the whole poem. And if you had that in this poem, a consistent voice, then you could just make the transition. You know, a father sharing the same aches and pains as a son crouches down to embrace him. The curtains close and the crowd sheds a silent tear. Now I watch a movie with my wife and the kid on the screen, you know, and then you just start ranting about the current movie. And if you had a voice the whole way through, it's the voice that's like the connecting, like the mortar for all the bricks you're placing down in the poem. And the real problem is it doesn't have a sense of voice, so it can't carry this idea farther. And I think that's where the issue is with this poem. And so interestingly, you know, both poets, I think, could really do well by having that concept of just thinking of actually somebody. And it can be, you can imagine anything you want, you know, anything that fits the poem. But somebody telling the poem will just help it be consistent and lock it into a place where we can connect to it the whole way through. And then that voice, which is sort of really a little sliver of your own psyche, you know, can tell you surprising things that you didn't realize you knew. And then that's where we get something interesting out of it too. So check out that poem, a poem by Andy Rooney, by Richard Garcia over at rattle.com. Yeah. Diamantito says, children perform adulthood, adults nostalgize childhood. Being what you aren't is the human condition. Yeah, that's great. All is dukkha. That is true. Yeah. Winston Munn says, you can rant, but you can't tell me to rant with you. That's a good point, too. Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's going to help both these poems. Hopefully, that's always the goal. Again, both these poems have really interesting conceits, like really interesting setups. So I like both those. Really, all four poems we looked at today have a lot of substance and a lot going for them. It's just a matter of putting it all together into a sort of consistent arc. And I think really the voice is the key to all four poems today, having a consistent voice. And that allows you to play within that voice and leap to new surprising things. So, all right, well, that's going to wrap it up. Thanks. That was a poem by Mecca Miles. And that's going to wrap up the critique this week. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks, everybody, for joining me. It was a lot of fun, like it always is. Now, coming up on the Rattlecast, our guest is going to be... Oh, I should tell you the prompt first, I guess. That's the better way to do it. The prompt for this week for the Rattlecast is to... hang on, we'll get there. The prompt this week is something to do with a... Oh, yeah, this is a hard one, I thought. I was having trouble. I was on a plane earlier, and I was trying to pick one to write about. So good luck to everybody. It was just pick an obscure holiday that occurs during the next week and write a poem that celebrates accordingly. Include which holiday date in the notes of your submission. So pick a holiday. If you type in just obscure holidays today. I think even Wikipedia has a thing like that. You Google it, you'll find a whole bunch of obscure, strange holidays. Write a poem about that in some way, celebrating it. And that's your prompt for this week. Now, the guest is going to be right here. David Mason is a guest. David's been on, I think it was Rattlecast 64, maybe. So a very long time ago when he had a new and selected poems out. This new book, Cold Fire, is just out from Red Hen Press. David is one of the preeminent narrative poets still alive today. We had a poetry space. It was with Greg Orr, talking about lyric versus narrative poetry. And I have to confess, I couldn't think of like a narrative poet these days. Like B.H. Fairchild was one I came up with, but there's so little. Anne Carson has a few narrative books that are great, but it's hard to come up with a narrative poet. And I can't believe I forgot about David Mason. David Mason wrote some of the best. He has a few, book-length books in verse that are really wonderful narrative poems. Ludlow is the one that really stands out to me. But anyway, he's the guest. He has a new book of poems, Cold Fire. That's David Mason, episode 335 of the Rattlecast, Monday, March 23rd, the regular time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Hope to see you there. Hope you have a great week. In the meantime, we'll talk to you later. Goodbye.